Hello BookTube, it's Courtney, America's Jewish Mother. And since we are close to through the end of June, I thought I would today give you a sort of update on the best and worst books I have read so far in 2020. So I will be interested to see by the end of 2020 if I look back and these still stay in the best and worst categories. So I'm going to give you the 5 best books I've read so far this year and the 5 worst books. So they don't have to have been published in 2020, just that I have read them this year. And by the way, the best and worst are in no particular order. So I'm just gonna start with the best and then end with my rant about the worst. So the first of the best books that I've read this year was James Baldwin's Notes of a Native Son, which is a collection of essays. I talked about this in I think a little bit more detail in my May wrap-up video because it was the last book that I read in May. So if you want to hear a little bit more detail about it, I encourage you to go check that video out. But yeah, basically this is a collection of 9 essays. Baldwin focuses on some pop culture topics like Richard Wright's Native Son, and Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel Uncle Tom's Cabin. He also focuses on issues concerning race in the United States, and then he also focuses some on how race is looked at abroad, especially thinking about the time that he spent living in France and traveling in Switzerland. So yeah, this is just a really sharp, excellent collection. Baldwin is always really insightful, and I was very glad to read this because it came after I had read 2 books that I did not like that I'm going to talk about in my worst books a little bit later on. So I was sort of especially glad to come to this. So yeah, that's James Baldwin, Notes of a Native Son. The next book in my best of 2020 so far is Robin DiAngelo's nonfiction book, White Fragility, which I read, I think, toward the end of April. I really liked this book. I thought it was really insightful. I felt like I got a lot out of it. I have heard a little bit of criticism of this book, that it's sort of like a primer, but I think that's what it's intended to do. It's not written for people who already know a lot about racism. It's written for kind of average, everyday white liberals who are not thinking about our own sort of defensiveness when it comes to the issue of racism and possibly our own racist behaviors and words that we're perpetuating without realizing it. So I think for people who have criticized this book for being too basic, you're probably not in the intended audience for it. But I felt like I got a lot out of White Fragility, so yeah, that's why it's in my best book so far. Okay, so the next book I want to talk about, my best so far of 2020, is Yaa Gyasi's Homegoing. So I just talked about this in my most recent Friday Reads video. I was so impressed by Homegoing, just its sweep and the span of history that it's able to cover in, I don't know, like 320-ish pages or something like that. I mean, it's just epic. It takes you from Ghana in the late 18th century all the way up to basically present day. It tells you about African history and the impact of sort of colonialism and the slave trade there. It tells you about what has happened to people who were kidnapped and became enslaved, and what happened after they came to the United States, and the sort of barriers that African Americans have faced ever since emancipation. So yeah, I was just so impressed with its sweeping scope. That's why it's on my best list. Okay, the next book that I read for my best of 2020 so far, that I want to talk about, is 4 Major Plays by Henrik Ibsen. So this contains A Doll's House, Ghosts, Hedda Gabler, and The Master Builder. And I just really enjoyed this collection of plays. I thought the first 2, A Doll's House and Ghosts, were super sharp and insightful on social issues, and I thought the latter two plays, Hedda Gabler and The Master Builder, were really sharp and insightful on issues pertaining to human nature. And I've thought a lot in the interim about both Hedda Gabler and The Master Builder, so I think if you have a book that leaves you thinking for a while, that's probably a good sign. And then the last book that I want to talk about in my best of 2020, before I move on to my worst, is Leo Tolstoy's Anna Karenina. So Lindsay from Lindsay's Book Life and I, Buddy, read this starting in January, and I think we finished it in March. So it took a while because Anna Karenina is quite long. And this was only the second time I was reading Anna Karenina. I'd read it once before when I was an undergrad, so it'd been, well over 10 years ago at this point. And I remember really liking it, and I gotta say, it held up for me. I think, again, sort of like Yad Jassi's Homegoing, Tolstoy's Anna Karenina is just so sweeping in scope. It covers so much about Russian life and history. You get problems of the aristocracy and upper class. You get some insight into problems among, like, the serfs and people who work for the aristocracy. And yeah, it just covers a ton in Russian history and in Russian society. And Tolstoy is just so sharp and insightful on matters of basic human nature and our shared experiences. There were so many times when Lindsay and I were reading this that we had the sense that Tolstoy was describing something that we felt like we felt that way when something like that has happened to us. And I think for a novel that was published in the 1870s to still be resonant in 2020 is a major accomplishment. So obviously this is a classic for a good reason. So yeah, oh, and then the other thing I wanted to say about it is there's a scene, there's a few chapters in Anna Karenina that are devoted to the death of a secondary character, and even those I just felt were so rich and just so sharply encapsulated what the process of dying is like, and then why when you are dying, when you actually die, it's like this release, not necessarily for you, the dead person, but it's sort of a release for the people who are surrounding you, because they see that you're getting weaker and weaker, and things that you could previously find some level of comfort or satisfaction from, like sleep or eating or drinking, like really basic things, you no longer even get enjoyment from those. And so in some ways it's like a release, both for the dying person, but also for the people around them when they finally pass. And I just thought that was just like amazingly portrayed. So yeah, Anna Karenina is my other best of 2020 so far. All right, so on to the worst. So these first two will not be a surprise to anyone who's been following my channel, because I talked about these in my May wrap-up video. But the first one on my worst list is Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things. Again, because I talked about this in my May wrap-up, I'm not going to say too much about it here. But yeah, basically this is a novel that kind of deals with the consequences of colonialism in India. But I just didn't get on with the writing style. I felt like nothing happens in this book for almost, 80% of it, except for like two things. Like only two things happen for the first 80% of it. And I just did not get on with it. So yeah. The next book that's on my worst of 2020 so far is Norman Rosenthal's The Gift of Adversity. So this is a book that the more I think about it, the more I just really feel disappointed, because I do not think it delivered what it promised, which was to tell me about the unexpected benefits of life's difficulties, setbacks, and imperfections. And Rosenthal sort of does that if he had amended the subtitle to say, The Unexpected Benefits to Norman Rosenthal of Life's Difficulties, Setbacks, and Imperfections. But it's sort of marketed as like this self-help thing where he's going to tell you how to, take things that are you know, difficult or troubling and turn them into, you know, positive things, and see them as opportunities. But I don't think he actually delivers on that, because he doesn't tell you how to do any of this stuff. He's just like, you should do this. And I'm like, okay, but how? So yeah, I just really felt like this didn't deliver. So this is why this is also in my worst of 2020 so far. Okay, next book I want to talk about is one that I think I wrapped this up in my April wrap-up video. But it's Clifford Odette's collection of plays, Waiting for Lefty and Other Plays. So this has 6 plays in it. And I just felt like of the 6 plays, only 2 of them were good at all. The other ones were really forgettable. The characters all blended together. And yeah, I just did not feel like they were particularly well distinguished, or that he was doing anything different in the other 4 plays in that collection. So that one was a downer. I also did not really get on with Cottage for a Child Not Born. I think this is also sometimes translated as Cottage for a Child Unborn, by Imre Kertész. And this is a short little novella. It wasn't even 100 pages long. And even though it was not even 100 pages long, I wanted to DNF it multiple times, but I just kind of stuck through it because it was so short. But it's the whole thing is a monologue and a reflection on the main character's life, and he needs therapy really badly. And you can tell that he's just in his head and trying to rationalize all of these things and intellectualize and not deal with his own deep-seated emotional issues and the trauma and scars that have been left in him by the Holocaust. But yeah, I just wanted to reach through the book and shake him and say, get some therapy. Stop talking, deal with your feelings. So yeah. And then the last book that is on my worst of 2020 list so far is John Barron's Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. And sort of similarly to the Rosenthal book, I kind of just felt like this book did not deliver what it was marketed as. So this is a sort of travel / true crime telling where the author travels to Savannah and is there for the multiple murder trials of this guy whose name I can't remember off the top of my head, who killed this guy Danny something. I read this in February, so it's been a little while back and I can't remember everyone's name now. But anyway, it's ostensibly supposed to revolve around these murder trials. And I thought those were the points of the book that were actually interesting and engaging. But Barron also sort of tries to do a lot of scene setting about Savannah. It's almost like he's expecting that his audience has never been in the South before. And I mean, I'm sure this was probably marketed mainly to readers not from the geographical U.S. South. Because again, he does a ton of scene setting and basically acts like, you know, no one's ever been to a southern city before and has no idea what things are like. So that's one issue I had with it. And then the other thing about that is that all of this scene setting and all of these like secondary people he follows around are not related to the actual trial of, is the guy's name Jim? God, I really don't remember, sorry. Whoever the main guy is who's on trial for these murders. So it's all this unrelated stuff. And then the other thing I didn't like is, so this book also features a couple of particularly memorable female black characters, and I felt like those were kind of just used for entertainment value, and that Barrett doesn't actually engage with sort of their own unique, those people's own unique positionality within Savannah and the South, especially considering that the author is hobnobbing with, you know, the elite society of Savannah, many of whom are outright racist. One in particular I can think of who uses the N-word multiple times. And I just felt like for Barrett to sort of make use of these 2 black female characters to sell his book and provide entertainment value for the white gaze, but not actually do any reflecting on how these women are marginalized in this society, that where he's, you know, this outsider who's hobnobbing with the elite. It just really rubbed me the wrong way, and it felt like really sort of creepy and slimy, so I didn't like that. So yes, those are my best and worst books of 2020 so far. If you disagree with, if you've read and or disagree with any of my thoughts on these, please feel free to leave me a comment down below. Please also feel free to tell me what you feel like are the best and worst books you have read so far in 2020. I would love to hear that. So yeah, I hope everyone is staying healthy and well. I hope you are doing good reading. And until next time, would it kill you to call you mother?